We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another special edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. Remember to please share, like, and subscribe to not just my podcast, my interviews, but all the programming on Pro Cannabis Media now that we are live streaming 24/7 on our Roku channel and our Apple channel and our website, Pro Cannabis Media. So happy to be interviewing this woman today again, because I met her 3 years ago in Jamaica as part of Kennex. Her name is Nyimbe McIntosh, and you probably are familiar with her dad, Peter Tosh, who was an original member of the Wailers, who played reggae music for a long time with Bob Marley. So Nyimbe, thank you so much, and it's great to see you again.
It's a pleasure to see you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, one of the things when I look at your bio and your experiences in your life, one of the things that continuously emerges is the fact that you were a Boston school teacher for 10 years, 11 years. Am I right?
That's right. I taught in Boston Public Schools for 10 years. I was teaching at New Mission High School as a math teacher and a special educator. And I did a little bit of science as well.
That's right. And you ended up going to Wentworth Technology School, and then you got your MBA somewhere else?
Yes, well, I did Wentworth Institute of Technology, electrical engineering degree, and then went and got my master's in education at UMass Boston.
There you go. Terrific. And I know we know hundreds of people the same, so we don't need to go into do you remember, do you know? Let's cut right to the chase here. Tell us a little bit about the Peter Tosh Foundation and what you're doing now.
Yes, and so my father actually passed away in 1987, and so when he passed away, his estate went into public administration, and so for many years it was administered by a public administrator, and it wasn't until 2009 where the family kind of realized and became educated enough to be like, hey, this is actually something we can control. And so finally, it was actually a local attorney, David Warnoff, that was like, shouldn't this be run by the family? And it was like, I didn't know that. It's just always been like this. And so in 2009, I became the official kind of head of the estate. And so with that being my responsibility, we've always tried to do any and everything possible to promote the legacy, from working on a major motion film, working on a Netflix series, working on docuseries, a play as well, theatrical play. And then, with the booming cannabis industry, and my father, as you mentioned, he was a founding member of the Wailers, but also started his solo career with the iconic song Legalize It, an album, which is right here. And so that's been the song of the legalization movement. And so it only seemed right that we venture into the cannabis space. But before doing that, it was very important that we have a strong foundation in a literal sense, but also in the figurative sense. And so we launched the Peter Tosh Foundation because my father always had music with a message of equal rights and justice, and to uplift people and educate people. So we thought it was important to do that first.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? As far as I think we need to go, we have come quite a long distance to the point where both in a Massachusetts, in a legal adult use state that's had a medical program since 2013, that I've had my card since, and now it's actually a political issue in our federal government, which continues to just not get educated enough about this plant. But we are light years ahead of where we were a decade ago. Isn't it amazing?
It is quite fascinating. It was 2014 that I visited Colorado, when they first became legal for recreational or adult use. And even still, as far ahead as we are, from, the federal government. You visit California, who's had legalization for many, many years. There's so much more to come as, the industry progresses in different areas in different states. And it just takes the education along with the regulations, of course.
Absolutely. And Lord knows there'll always be regulations when it comes to cannabis. And even those who are advocates for it are, for the most part, willing to go along with a lot of these. In Massachusetts, though, there is a huge controversy over these host community agreements that licensees have to acquire with a lease before they can even start their application process. So I really believe that even though Massachusetts does have a vibrant market, I really think they've done everything they can to slow down the rollout. And, I know people who own dispensaries, and it's been extremely frustrating for them. But, here we are, over 170 dispensaries in Massachusetts. There's grow facilities sprouting up everywhere, and it's a pretty vibrant industry.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that there's been a lot of growth. I know people kind of on the other end of the spectrum that have had those challenges with, those host community agreements. They're paying rent in properties for several years. I know people that have, sold their homes to try to sustain the properties that they own. And so it's been a challenge, I think, in the sense that, in particularly people of color, that and those that have been affected by war on drugs, although it's vibrant, I still feel like there's a huge disparity between the people that are participating in the industry and those that have been affected by the industry. So I would definitely like to see a shift, with participation when it comes to people of color. And that's nationwide. It's not just Massachusetts.
Right. And it's also one of the ideals of the CAO law. It's not even a law. It was a public document that Senator Schumer introduced last summer. And of course, Senator Booker from New Jersey, he is adamant about making sure that there is an expungement of past records for those who have been incarcerated, which I know is something that's very special to you. And I also know of your work with Steve D'Angelo's Last Prisoner Project. How is that movement going? And I'm on the newsletter of Steve's and Last Prisoner Project, so I know they've done some amazing things considering.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. So with the Peter Tosh Foundation, the Last Prisoner Project is what we call an advocacy partner. And they have allowed us to kind of share in some of our initiatives, particularly the Justice for Jawar, and we can get into that a little bit more. But Last Prisoner Project has done amazing work with releasing cannabis prisoners from prison, supporting their families, creating grants to support the families of loved ones that are incarcerated. And they continue to be on the front lines with pushing forward with federal regulation as well as expungement, because one of the issues is that although some states are putting expungement into the regulations, what's missing is the automatic expungement, because unfortunately the burden ends up being on the ex-prisoner to go through all of this due process, which often they're ignorant of. And so a lot of times the expungement doesn't happen if it's not automatic. The burden really should be on the states to make sure that they take care of all of the individuals that they've wronged in the past.
Absolutely. And I'm all for workforce development, because we don't want to just throw these people back into society without any skills or training and an opportunity to get hired either by the cannabis community or just the community at large. This is still a huge issue, isn't it?
Oh, most definitely. You figure if you're incarcerated for, even a year, simple things like, getting your license, being able to find adequate and affordable housing. And then you're trying to apply for a job, but then if you don't have housing, how does, you don't even have any place to send mail. And so there's a lot of wraparound services that are needed for individuals that have been previously incarcerated. So there has to be a lot more support in that. And so you're absolutely right. Not only just, getting into the workforce, but simple things as, childcare when they start to be around their families and all the different other supports. But education is definitely a main focus and need.
Absolutely. And it's something we believe in all the time here. We're constantly looking for new content that educates the public about this plant medicine that is being
Mm-hmm.
used so effectively, anecdotally,
Yep.
around the world and has been for thousands of years. You mentioned your brother Jawara. Now, I know
Yes.
when we first met, you were involved with Justice for Jawara and that foundation. Unfortunately, since that time, he has passed. I know your story. Do you mind sharing that again with our audience?
Not at all. So Jawara, who's Peter Tosh's, my dad's youngest son, was arrested for cannabis possession back in 2013 in New Jersey. It was Father's Day weekend, and we actually originally thought, or I thought it was just going to be something that kind of we put behind us as a family. But he ended up being held without a hearing for 3 months before actually um, us attending the hearing to find out that he was facing 20 years for cannabis possession. It was kind of mind blowing. Fortunately, he was able to make bail that year in 2013 in December. And then for 3 years, he went through pretrial motions, constantly being told that, this would be the best plea offer he'd get. So it would go down to 15 years, and then they'd like say, well, this is the best you'll get, you'll get the full 20, or then it will go down to 10 years. And, after a little while, and he'll have that kind of situation over his head where he was concerned about, um, you know, the legacy that New Jersey has. They actually have one of the highest mass incarceration rates in the country. And then trying to fight against that system. We are followers of Rastafari. He's a father of four. He's never been involved with the criminal justice system before. He's a musician, and he's also an activist. And so at that time, we were really torn. Do we really try to stand up for what we believe in, or do we risk him being taken out of his family's life and, taken out of our lives for possibly 20 years? And so in 2016, he did take a plea. And at that time, I think it was down to about 5 years, but because he had pretty much did 6 months, they were saying that, you'll probably only serve about a year total. If you turn yourself in, so you'll probably just be able to put it behind you. And so at that point, my brother decided to turn himself into Bergen County Jail in January of 2017. It was about a month later when my mom actually called me very frantically on the phone, and she could barely speak, but she was saying, Niambi, there's a doctor, there's a surgeon on the phone, and he's saying something about your brother. And so the surgeon was like, hey, Niambi, Dr. So-and-so from Hackensack Medical Center, and I need to perform a life-saving medical procedure on your brother. He's been attacked by another inmate in jail, and we need to authorize this surgery. We had not heard anything from the jail at this point, and this was our first interaction, knowing that something had happened to Jawara. So we authorized the procedure and eventually flew right away. We just, got together and flew to New Jersey to be by his side. When we got to Hackensack Medical Center, they had told us originally, like right at check-in, they were like, oh, he can't have visitation. You have to call the jail. And so we called the jail, and they're just like, we don't normally allow visitation. That's not something that we do. He's a ward of the state. And so honestly, I know that it was my father's name that allowed them to, make a consideration for us to see him. And when we walked into the surgical ICU, we saw Jawara. He had a neck brace on. His face was bruised. He had half of his locks were shaved off. He had a breathing tube down his throat. He was connected to oxygen, and he had handcuffs on his ankle, and he was surrounded by correctional officers. He was fighting for his life. And it was really at that moment where I realized that that's when I quit teaching, actually, and knew that I had to, pretty much, I knew I had a new purpose ahead of me. Unfortunately, he had severe traumatic brain injury, and he was unable to do anything for himself. the simplest things, from communicate to eat. His body was trying to figure out how to just breathe at this point on its own. And he stayed in the ICU for 3 months before coming to Massachusetts and being in the hospital for a little bit over 500 days. We took him home and finally were able to care for him and provide 24-hour care. But unfortunately, in 2020, he had passed away from his injuries. And so that was the continuation of the Justice for Jawara, that we continue to share his story to let people really understand how important federal legalization is, if not global legalization. America incarcerates the highest percentage of the global population. And we are known to, compared to any other major country, you look at China or Russia, it's just not okay. And it's not a safe place for particularly people that are nonviolent offenders. Right. And so federal legalization is urgent. It's not something that we can continue to just push back.
Yeah. And by the way, that's an amazing story. And it's also available at a very special dispensary in Jamaica Plain in Boston called Seed. I actually, when they opened and I went in to do a little walking tour with April and the rest of them there, I saw your story in an actual jail cell in the middle of the dispensary. They have an amazing social justice museum and exhibit inside that dispensary. And I have urged people, that is what we call a destination dispensary, besides just the dispensing of the plant medicine, but just to learn about the history of it. And I was amazed at the mural on the wall of all the former musicians who have had situations with the law where they were arrested or at least hassled. And there's documentation of that too. How did you get involved with Seed?
April had reached out to me to be on her curating council. So Seed is the dispensary, but there's actually a nonprofit organization, which is the museum, called Core Social Justice Cannabis Museum. And so she asked me, along with some other amazing individuals, to participate in curating the museum and all of the exhibits.
Yeah,
and
the
story was only fitting.
Yeah, it's a great job. And again, I definitely urge people who happen to be listening to this, and if you are in the Massachusetts area or you visit, check that out. It's in JP. You can't miss it because it's literally in the middle of Jamaica Plain, and right in the center, right at the circle there. And it's a really, really nicely run dispensary. And of course, I'm pretty sure it's mostly female owned and operated. Am I right?
Yes, it's mostly female. It's also minority, a huge percentage of minority owned and operated. April made a point to really try to do it right. And, I think she embodies, and Seed really embodies what the cannabis industry should look like, being inclusive of those that have been impacted by the war on drugs and making sure that it's a diverse establishment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we encourage that as well. You talked about that story about your brother. And as you know, Last Prisoner Project is dedicated to get every prisoner in our jail system right now, our prison system right now, who has been arrested for cannabis out and get their records expunged. It's an incredible undertaking by Steve D'Angelo and his whole group there. But there's a bigger picture. And now that I've learned quite a bit about our prison system, punishment doesn't work. There has to be some kind of a different philosophy and thought process about what we can do for our prisoners, because it has worked. Reform has worked in other countries in the modern era. Okay, so I recognize that it's a privately run enterprise, and at the time, law enforcement, they love to profile the people of color so that they could hassle them and get their arrest records where they needed to be. They had to meet a certain quota of arrests or whatever it was. They filled up the jail with nonviolent drug offenders. And I was pissed off, to be honest with you, when I learned more and more about that. Are you involved at all in any kind of a prison reform movement other than working with Last Prisoner Project?
That's one of the main movements that I participate in, and through the Peter Tosh Foundation, we're continuously looking for partners to really to really share Jawara's story, to have people understand why prison reform is definitely needed. As you said, punishment does not work. And a lot of people that are in our prison system are dealing with poverty first. And mental illness as well. And so when we look at even our most violent offenders, usually that's an issue around mental illness. Healthy people don't usually kill people. You know what I mean?
Thankfully,
That's usually how things work. And so it's if we can, as a society, understand that first, access to good education is most important. There's a direct correlation between the pipeline to prison and those that are illiterate from a very young age, and you'll see that people often stray away from school if they struggle academically, and then what's left is getting yourself in trouble, and that's universal. It doesn't matter the color or creed that you come from, but unfortunately, often in predominantly Black neighborhoods, you'll find that the education system doesn't match their white counterparts in a lot of spaces. And so it's time for us as a society to really invest in education first, and then also support those that need mental health support. Now and during the pandemic, there's been just an influx of situations, and we're seeing that it's affecting everyone, and we as a society definitely have to do a lot more.
Yeah, and again, I hate to bring up sports, but that's my background. And professional athletes are recognizing the importance of mental illness too. And we've seen some examples in the news, even within the last year. But I want to talk to you about the educational system here in the United States, because I like to think of myself as an educator and a coach, as well as a producer. And I guess I'm a little businessman too. But I definitely, I am concerned not only about our cities and the education there, access to the internet there, like they get in the suburbs, right? But it's what is being taught. Our life skills, don't you think life skills or more vocational trade education would be more valuable to people in our world? I mean, how do you view some of the reforms in education that you'd like to see?
No, thanks for asking. I think that one of the things that are really important, and you mentioned trade, that's very important. Just general life skills, health and wellness is extremely important. We have a health epidemic, right now, and we have large numbers of people dying from heart disease, diabetes, and only if education of like how diet, simple little things, that could easily be taught from a very young age to help us understand how we can not only have outlets for when we're stressed, but also how we can impact our bodies healthy through just exercise and some of the fundamentals. Finance education is not taught in the schools. Some schools will teach it, but it's very few. It's not something that's as mandated by the government. It's not part of the core curriculum. And there's some, exceptional schools that offer that, but we should all know how to balance a checkbook. We should all know how to use an ATM. By the time you graduate, you should understand the difference between a credit card and a debit card. And so even, and I will go into sex education, and just sex education is health education, where it's human biology on how to, how to understand how we function as humans, but then how to be safe when you function as humans. And so right. I could go through a long list, as I'm a former educator, so there was always, I used my space to kind of show documentaries during lunchtime. I was a teacher that would try to give everything under the sun besides on top of math, while I had students for those 4 years in high school.
It's funny, something I learned today. I knew that you were a teacher in the Boston school system, but I didn't realize it was math, which is kind of unique for a female, because that whole STEM initiative, and I recognize that women can learn engineering skills just as well as men can. I recognize that. Okay. And in
Yeah.
fact, maybe even better. Okay. That being said, it's still rare. And that's why I think it's awesome that you were able to do that for quite a period of time in Boston. Obviously, you
Yeah.
enjoy that experience. There's nothing better than seeing your students actually learn something and then use it in life or in their world, right? I mean, I still live for that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had students to just highlight how simple education can help. When they come in with their like yellow or orange soda, I'm like, hey, you see that ingredient? You know, yellow number 5. I'm like, that's a carcinogen. Do you know what a carcinogen is? I'm like, that's a cancer-causing ingredient. And I'll watch a kid take it and throw it in the trash right there, and come in every day after that just drinking water. And so, yeah, I was an engineer for many years, and I always love working with my hands, and so thought that's really what I wanted to do. But I've always had a passion for young people and educating and helping young people. So I realized I really enjoyed teaching, and so that's where I spent most of my time teaching.
And that's great. And I always say, once a teacher, always an educator. Okay.
Yes.
And that's really, really important. I want to offer one thing on recording, okay, and make sure you understand that I have no agenda here. Somehow, some way, we'd like to create either a public service announcement or tell your story to our regular audience. Whether it's a 1 minute or a 2 minute little video, we'd love to do it. I always rant about the fact that we're trying to learn about this plant, but the industry is banned from even doing public service announcements on traditional radio or TV. We're an internet network. I welcome it. I would love to offer our services to produce something for you and your foundation if you'd be interested in that.
I definitely love to learn more about it. Sounds pretty cool. Sounds interesting. You have my contact information through William, yep. I'm sure. But it sounds like something that, we can definitely participate in.
Fantastic. Nyembe, it has been, now I've had 2 pleasures of hanging out with you and talking with you. This one we will preserve forever on the internet. Okay. I promise you that.
Awesome.
And again, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find out more about the Peter Tosh Foundation, how do they get in touch with you? What's the email or the website they can check that out?
Thank you for asking. So it's www.petertosh.com and then @PeterTosh on any social media platform. So that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. And so we're pretty accessible.
So I got to tell you, as we close here, I've loved reggae music and the Jamaican culture since I visited that country when I was 12 years old.
Oh, okay? Wow. Awesome.
And by the way, I was not partaking at 12. It was a few years later, but I still appreciated the music. And even in college here in Boston at Tufts University, one night we went down to the Orson Welles Cinema in Harvard Square, and Jimmy Cliff was playing at the music hall.
Nice.
I'm dating myself here, but that's the song, right? WBCN, the radio station, simulcast the concert. And after the concert, we all piled into my car, drove to Cambridge, watched The Harder They Come. And Jimmy Cliff showed up at the end of that movie. And I waved to him, and then I walked up to him and I shook his hand. And that was really a thrill for me. So I love the music. I love the country of Jamaica. I want to see them get their just place as the international community evolves with cannabis. Are you involved at all in the native land as far as the growth of cannabis besides growing it in the ground?
We are working to build more relationships with some of the Rastafari communities there, and really work to integrate them into the cannabis industry. It's very complicated since being in a whole other country.
I learned that at CanX 2019. I'll tell you that.
Yes.
I actually interviewed the first man, the Rastafarian, that was at that conference, and that was a thrill for me. And he enlightened me about the religion and the role that the plant plays in their world. And that was fascinating for me. I loved it. And again, I'm going to wave the flag and offer again, please, we will get in touch with you. We will figure out a way to work together, because I share the love of life that is all about the plant, right?
Awesome. Yes, definitely.
There you go. Well, that'll do it for another edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. I want to thank Nyembe McIntosh and also my staff at PCM for putting this out there. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there, people. Let's use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
PCM TV is supported by Salient Systems, a world leader in video management security, and by Revolutionary Clinics, a medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the cost low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.